Hello and welcome back to Restoration DIY. In this episode I'll be making a bowl using some Ash Offcuts cast into purple coloured epoxy resin. So without further ado, let's get into it. To start with, I cut down one piece of ash so I could fit two together in the casting. After a quick waxing to aid the releasing of the cured blank, I placed both chunks side by side with a smaller piece to wedge them apart, and with that done I could begin mixing the resin. The colour of choice was purple, and I hoped 2 batches would be enough. As ever, I used my preferred brand of 2:1 epoxy resin. If you're wondering why I go through this in every video, it's that a high percentage of you are new to the channel, so if this is your first visit, then welcome, and I hope you'll stick around to the end. With both parts added to the mixing cup and the colourant added, I then mixed each batch for a minimum of 4 minutes. I'll just show one being mixed. With 2 batches mixed, I poured them into the casting bucket, and there wasn't enough to cover the offcuts, so I mixed one more smaller batch, added that to the rest, put some weight on top to stop the wood floating in the resin, and I put it in the pressure pot and added around 50 psi. It's a few days later and the resin has had plenty of time to cure. After removing the blank from the casting bucket, I marked the centre point on each end and drilled a shallow hole for the tailstock centre and a deeper 8mm hole for the woodworm screw. I also fashioned a small packer to help level the top of the blank. With a blank fixed to the lathe using a woodworm screw and supported by the tailstock, I could begin turning. This blank was well balanced, so I could start at around 1000 RPM. I began removing material with Easywood Tools carbide finisher. This has a negative rate cutter installed, and for this project I turned it around 90 degrees to a fresh cutting edge. If you watched my previous video, you'll have seen an offcut placed in the same orientation as the ones in this blank. This is something I wanted to recreate in this project, to see how the figure would look in the wood, so I was eager to remove the outer layers of resin to reveal what was underneath. This was the first glimpse I got of the timber offcuts, and it was exactly what I was hoping for. The rings formed by the tree were laid out in layers around the outer surface. I couldn't wait to see the finished bowl, so I continued peeling back the resin, revealing more of the wood. Each time I stopped the lathe, the more it became obvious that this should be a fairly simple bowl. No pedestal, just a gently curving side cutting through the rings, set on top of a slightly raised foot. I toyed with the idea of making a lid for it, but I decided the grain set against the resin would be enough. Next, I roughly formed the raised foot. For this I used a 3/8 bowl gouge, slicing away the layers until I got close to the required size. Once there, I levelled the base, cutting all the resin off to leave the exposed timber. Using the full-size carbide, I formed the base of the bowl, creating a gentle curve up into the side. Whilst doing this, I uncovered a void in the resin, and this forced me to cut deeper into the middle section. This formed a pinch waist, which led into a slightly overhanging rim, making the timber figuring even more pronounced. The base needed a little more work to refine the shape, so I used a 3/8 bowl gouge to reduce its size, before moving on to shaping the outer surface, going a little deeper into the resin in the middle section, blending and fairing the curves into the rim. The large negative rate scraper came out next. With this I was able to remove all the tool marks left by the carbide cutter and fine tune the surface. It also removed most of the tear out, and what was left would be got rid of with the coarser grit sanding. To finish the outer surface, I used a skew chisel to define the base and refine the curves around the lower section and the rim. With this done, I sanded using 80 grit to make sure all the tear out had been removed. Then it was time to cut the mortise. For the mortise, I marked out the outer diameter of around 80mm, then I defined the edge using the thin parting tool to a depth of 6mm, quarter of an inch. This was followed by a 3/8 bowl gouge to remove the inner material. Next, I used the dovetail cutter to cut the dovetail to fit the 4-jaw hook. A little bit more work with the gouge to clean up the inside and cut away the last piece in the middle, but this left a little bit still to be removed, and with no support it was very unbalanced, so I used a chisel to cut it back and then sanded it flush. With the mortise done, I sanded just the base and applied a finish. I will sand and finish the rest later. I then turned the piece around and securely fixed it in the 4-jaw chuck so I could begin hollowing out the inside. After removing the uneven top surface with a bowl gouge, I set to hollowing out. This was made more difficult because of the orientation of the Ash Offcuts. I was cutting into the end grain, and I knew this would be the case, but with a sharp gouge I was able to take some reasonable cuts. I slowly worked my way down to the bottom of the bowl, stopping from time to time to check my progress. As I got deeper, access got to be a problem, and I had my fair share of catches, but I wasn't too worried. After a few more passes, and with a lot of the weight removed, I would soon be able to remove the tailstock. With the tailstock removed, I was able to thin down the centre support and cut away material so that it eventually snapped off. With that done, I could continue shaping the inside of the bowl, working my way down the sides and across the base. I left the base quite thick at around 20mm, 3/4 of an inch. I was aiming to make the side around 10mm, 3/8 of an inch. I switched over to the full-size carbide finisher to continue refining the shape, stopping frequently to check the progress. It was at this stage I could see the pattern of the grain on the inner surface, and I really liked it. Although the two offcuts came from different logs, to my surprise the grain pattern was a very close match. After a final go with a carbide finisher, the inside was done. I used a skew chisel to blend and fare the rim into the bowl side. This took a couple of goes, but with that done, it was time for sanding from 80 to 3000 grit. I did this both inside and out, ready for the finish to be applied. After sanding, I cleaned down with denatured alcohol, then applied 2 coats of sanding sealer, both denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Next up, Yorkshire grit, just a single coat, cleaned away till no more residue is picking up on the paper towel. Then the acrylic polishing, beginning with Merkur Polar Shine 10, just a single coat, thoroughly cleaned away with paper towel. This is quickly followed by Polar Shine 5, just another single coat, polished off with more clean paper towel. And to finish, Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax, 2 coats, polished off to seal and protect the surface. Well, that's it, another project finished, and I think this one looks great. Setting the offcuts with the end grain in this orientation has really given a very cool effect, especially set against the Purple Epoxy Resin. I hope to do another project like this very soon. I'm hoping to find a cracked log I can stabilise with coloured resin, but until then, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and if I could ask you to give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.